So, Pomp, welcome to the magic internet money that you're producing for me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Super excited to do this. How are you?
15 minutes of trying to I have four different recording services for this reason, and they've all failed us.
It's all right. It's all right.
Funny.
The whole key to life is just being persistent. We figured it out. We're good to go.
Good to have this chat. You're a very busy guy to get locked into a podcast.
I just told somebody they know that I don't do that many podcasts anymore, and they were like, "What happened?" I was like, "I think I scheduled this like 6 to 8 weeks ago." So he slid in this calendar. I'm not canceling on him. Let's do it.
Well, I appreciate it. I was more so interested in just having a conversation with you about your thoughts about how this cycle has played out, because it's played out way different than any of us have thought would play out. It seems like we were all wrong. Like the shitcoiners were wrong, the DeFi guys were wrong. The only people that were probably right were the meme coiners. It seems like they outperformed all of us. What happened?
No, look, I think that most people, let's use Bitcoin as kind of the quintessential example. Most people looked and they said, hey, the last 3 cycles, here's what happened. If this happens again, here's what will happen in the future. And I think that that's a pretty fair analysis to make, basically because you're caveating with, if it repeats, this is what will happen. So I don't think that that necessarily was the wrong analysis in terms of a repeat of the past 3 cycles would have led to over $100,000 Bitcoin, et cetera. Now, the big if in there is, if it happens, but it didn't happen. And that's what surprised a lot of folks, right? Is that it didn't play out the way that these last cycles have. And so, take myself, for example. In 2019, I wrote a piece and I publicly said, hey, look, I think that it's going to go over $100,000 by the end of December 31st, 2021. And that's based on the last 3 cycles. If it repeats, blah, blah, whatever. Now, since I wrote that to the end of 2021, there was a global pandemic. There was a recession. The Fed printed trillions of dollars. Like, think of all the stuff that
China
happened.
banned mining.
Just think of all the stuff that happened between 2019 and the end of 2021. And even though all that stuff happened, I wrote it when it was around $10,000, give or take. We still got kind of a 7x, right? Rather than getting a 10x in terms of the US dollar exchange price. And so I think that, to your point, there's a lot of people who are very surprised that we didn't get kind of $100,000 or higher Bitcoin price. Now, with that said, I actually walk out of 2021, and I think that there's other surprises, and in some cases may actually be more important. The first is, if you told me going into 2020, hey, if we take 50% of hash rate offline, we'll be right back to an all-time high in hash rate within 8 months. I'd have told you you're crazy. There's no way I think I would have thought that that could have happened, right?
It's one of the strongest things that have ever happened in Bitcoin's history, honestly. Like, we survived a nation state attack. This is something we would have had to deal with in perpetuity. China owns Bitcoin. It's communist coin. It's anti-American. Nope. That's just no longer something we have to deal with. I think that's a super bullish thing long term for Bitcoin.
Yeah. And look, I have had plenty of conversations on my podcast or in debates with folks. There's one conversation I had with Brad Garlinghouse at Ripple. All of the XRP and Ripple folks got all worked up because I basically took a position that the China-based hash rate wasn't as big of a threat as I think they in the XRP community specifically thought it was. On top of that, I also had a conversation with Mike Green.
I remember that one.
And Mike basically, hey, look, this is a China coin and China controls Bitcoin, the whole 9 yards. And my position was always in this weird world of yes, it is a fact that 60+% resides in one country, but that does not mean that that country actually controls it. That does not mean that they have the hash rate. And so I always thought that if at any point a nation state became abrasive to miners, rather than them just oh, sorry, we're just going to shut down our machines, they're more likely to unplug them. Now, I never thought it'd be 50%. I never thought that they would be able to so quickly unplug and move elsewhere, right? There's kind of a 2-part there. So I think there's just a lot of surprises around mining as one example. The other thing is, I don't think anyone thought in 2019 we'd have a nation state in the next 24 months go ahead and actually make it legal tender, start mining Bitcoin, start talking about building these ATM networks, build a Bitcoin city, Bitcoin bonds. I mean, crazy what El Salvador has done. Amazing, but crazy. And so I think that it's a reminder, and it's kind of this like intellectually humiliating kind of reminder to be humble about the inability for humans to predict the future. Now, I say humiliating, and people will be like, oh, that's pretty aggressive. But I think that's the only way that you can really knock into somebody's head, especially somebody who's been winning for a long time in terms of the Bitcoin community. We've watched Bitcoin compound at 170, 180% annually for a decade. That's what winning looks like, right? Now, all of a sudden, you need kind of a shock to the system to say, hey, whoa, hold on a second. Let's not become arrogant. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's make sure that we continue to remain kind of intellectually honest about where we are, what the risks are, what are the challenges, what's the work that needs to be done. And there's still a ton of work left to be done. This is not yet over. This is not yet kind of accomplished, right? And so in some weird way, and maybe it's just me trying to make ourselves feel better, but like I actually think that surprise will end up being a net positive because it woke up a lot of folks to say, hey, look, we got a lot of work to do here. This isn't just number go up and, you know, we can all go to sleep for a decade and come back and Bitcoin's going to be $5 million. I think now you see people kind of have this renewed energy of like, let's go to work. Let's actually build this thing. And I think that's healthy. I think that's really important for the long-term sustainability and durability of the network.
Yeah, well, on that point specifically regarding like the narrative that we thought was going to happen coming into 2020, 2021, I know most of us were, you know, through the bear market. A lot of people had come in through the ICO funnel in 2017 and then just got absolutely wrecked when the liquidity disappeared. There's basically like it was a no bid environment during 2018 and 19 for all those coins. And we kind of got a whole bunch of really amazing new thinkers about how to value Bitcoin. Like you brought Breedlove on. I think one of the first major podcasts was him giving this big essay. I think it was to Paul Tudor Jones or Ray Dalio or somebody like that. And like we got this whole class of really good Bitcoin thinkers. And we kind of developed a thesis that like there is no second best, like Michael Saylor. And we thought, you know, you're actually crazy if you think Dogecoin's ever going to get to $1. Like you are literally should be put in an insane asylum if you think Dogecoin will be put $1, we'll be getting to $1. And yeah, we kind of were winning for sure, but our narrative's definitely been challenged through all of 2021. I know that me personally, I'm like trying to parse what happened and see, like, you know, you think that we should have learned the lessons of that bear market and realized like utility coins have no shareholder rights, you know, like it's not as good of an asset as Bitcoin. They're illegal securities, the SEC, the FTC, like all these bodies are looking to regulate all this stuff. And we figured like a lot of that energy would go into Bitcoin and a lot of the retail speculation would kind of not repeat what happened. But I mean, we were so wrong. It's, you know, who would have thought Elon Musk was going to come in and start pushing Dogecoin and Mark Cuban was going to come in and start pushing like 3-3 Ponzi schemes and stuff like that. Like, how do you think it's going to play out over the next little bit? Like, how do you think this is going to resolve?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a key difference that a lot of people, you know, look, our society, I've been saying it more and more now, our society suffers from like a critical thinking crisis, which is everyone just takes whatever the mainstream narrative is, or they just take what somebody else told them and they just repeat it. And like, that is the thing. And I think that we could really benefit from being better at thinking. Right. And how to be more intentional about thinking and how to really spend time on it. Right. It's like an intellectually lazy, efficient thing is just, oh, I just repeat what somebody else told me. Now, the reason why I say that is my framework, which again, I reserve the right to change my mind in the future, but as of right now, stands where there's two revolutions happening. There's a monetary revolution and there's a technology revolution. Now, the monetary revolution is where the kind of Bitcoin community resides. And I think they really, really understand this. They understand how money works. They understand the history of money. They understand the evolutions of good and bad money. They understand how credit is created. They understand what the impact on the wealth inequality gap is. They understand how government is relationship to money today. They understand central banking, like all these things that a lot of folks in Bitcoin community spend a lot of time talking about, educating on, et cetera. And in the monetary revolution, maximalism is the natural end state, right? If you're a US dollar or if you're a US citizen, the US dollar is your maximalistic position. You get paid in dollars, you save in dollars, you invest in dollar denominated assets, and you also pay your taxes in dollars. You are a US dollar maximalist. Now, what ultimately ends up happening is people who are arguing for monetary competition, they're operating under the belief that individuals have 20% in Mexican pesos, 20% in US dollars, 20% in euros, and 20% in yen, and 20% in gold. Like, that's not how people operate their lives, right? They basically have one currency, they denominate their wealth in that currency, they save in that currency, they buy things in that currency, and that's it. And so ultimately, I think what we're watching here is Bitcoin has begun the rise of the global store of value, which is the first step in a sequence. Now, can Bitcoin transition from solely a global store of value to global store of value and a global medium of exchange? I think we're starting to see signs of that with the Lightning Network, et cetera. But really, I think we've checked the box of it is a global store of value. You may argue how good of a store of value it is or how good it is relative to other assets, but it's definitely a store of value. There's hundreds of millions of people around the world that are using this. Medium of exchange can be really important. But if we can crack the nut on global store of value and medium of exchange, bam, you've got two of the three core components. I believe that once you get those two components, you get the third, which is the unit of account. Once people start to use it as a store of value and a medium of exchange, then they begin to price assets or services in it. So that path, in my mind, ends up in a natural end state of maximalism. And I think that's what we're watching play out with Bitcoin. And so all these people who are like, oh, we have a better Bitcoin, we have a different Bitcoin, we have something that competes with Bitcoin, whatever. It ends up in a maximalistic state. And I don't think that when you align up the technology, the community, and also kind of the mental energy that has been put towards this, you're going to unseat Bitcoin now. It's basically we have one shot at a decentralized digital currency globally. Bitcoin is that one shot. If it works, we win. If it doesn't work, there will not be another because people won't then shift their confidence and say, oh, the first attempt didn't work. Let's go and use the second one. For the mainstream audience, different than the cypherpunk or kind of the more technical community, but for the mainstream audience, this is the first digital currency they were ever interacting with. It will be the only one that they ever interact with in terms of it being decentralized. If it doesn't work, they then will write it off in their head and be like, oh yeah, this is just another one of those, non-nation state backed currencies. And therefore, I don't think that works. And you have to wait for a whole nother generation of people to come who they haven't interacted with one. So I think it's very important that we make this work. On the other side of this is this technology revolution. And this is where pretty much everything else resides. And when you think of technology revolution, technology can be either adopted because it is technically superior, or it can be adopted because they are able to basically spend a bunch of marketing dollars to convince people to use something, right? This is the classic VHS versus, some of the other technologies, or maybe it's DVD versus Blu-ray, or it's, cell phones versus something else. When you think about those paths in a technology revolution, the difference is that you constantly have to be evolving. In monetary assets, you don't want to keep evolving. You want to be super predictable. You want to be super secure. In the technology revolution, you want to constantly be evolving. And so what I think we're watching play out here is all this like nonsense that you're describing and you're calling out and kind of identifying. It's all marketing focused. And the reason is because you either have to win on technical superiority or you have to win on marketing. And the truth is a decentralized database like a blockchain is not really very useful for a lot of things, right? The whole idea of centralized companies was to drive efficiency. Most companies want to be efficient. Most systems want to be efficient. They want to have the fastest transaction times. They want to have the lowest cost. They want to serve the customer the best, right? And so ultimately that's at odds with the whole point of a decentralized digital transparent blockchain. And so when you start to think of that, you're like, okay, we're either going to end up with one of two things. Either people are going to realize that this piece of technology is not the best for what they're trying to accomplish, and we'll see a move towards more and more centralization and a pursuit of efficiency. We started to see some of that with things like Binance Smart Chain, Solana, etc. Or what we're going to see is people who believe that they can overpower the lack of technical superiority with marketing. And this is where you see everything from yield farming to NFT, kind of marketing schemes, etc. Now, I choose to say to myself, look, I actually don't know if I can underwrite the non-sane activities, right? And what I mean by that is like, to me, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. But guess what? There's a lot of companies that are trading in the public market that you, I, and hundreds of other people would be like, that company doesn't make any sense. But they're trading at a multi-billion-dollar valuation because they got a group of people to believe that it had value and they grew really fast, they had great marketing and customer acquisition, et cetera. So I think we have to separate away, like, does something survive versus is something actually valuable, right? And in my eyes, what I choose to pursue in terms of valuable is durability. And so the durability to me is Bitcoin. If I look out 100 years, what's the thing I have the highest confidence is still going to be around? Literally, I think Bitcoin will out survive 99.9% of the stocks that are out there in the stock market, right? And so like, okay, that's where I would choose to place value. There's other people who choose to place value on other things. And so the reason why I draw that line is I think that it's very hard to keep your mental energy and foot in the monetary revolution and at the same time also pay attention to and be an expert or well-versed in the technology revolution. Because the things that make those two separate bodies of work go are almost opposite of each other. And so if you just think of it that way, it's like, all right, people kind of make a choice, right? Most people who are into some of the technology stuff around the technology revolution, they don't participate in Bitcoin. They don't spend a lot of time on Bitcoin, et cetera, and vice versa. And rather than like throw tomatoes at each other, if you will, right? It's just like, hey, look, I choose to focus over here. Whatever you guys do, knock yourselves out. By the way, I don't think necessarily that I am well-versed in terms of telling you which one's going to work, which one's not, because it isn't based on the way that I evaluate technology. It isn't based on the way that I think about durability, right? It's based on something else, which, look, some of the shit that I thought was going to not work, but never say anything publicly, is working, right? In terms of it's continuing to get adoptions, continuing to kind of continue surviving, continue going up in price, et cetera. And some of the stuff that I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. It seems like they got like some audience around it and maybe that'll end up being a real thing. But like, you know, whatever, we'll see. Ended up going to zero like the next day. And so it's just like when you look at this stuff, it's like just know who you are and kind of what you're good at evaluating and then just focus your time there and don't worry about everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of like come to, when I first was like following you on Twitter, I was like, oh, this guy's a shitcoiner. He's a closet shitcoiner. He's pretending he likes Bitcoin. He's just affinity scamming, like, you know, typical Maxi stuff, right? And then I'm like, wait a second, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. He has a deep sort of philosophical thesis on why he thinks Bitcoin is great. And he's just open to exploring other things. And, you know, I kind of try to separate myself from thinking, like, even though I get emotional about when I see narratives emerge that like XYZ coin is better than Bitcoin because it's not as bad for the earth, or Bitcoin's boomer coin because it has no utility. Like that's the problem that like I find myself personally struggling with. I completely agree with your thesis of like Bitcoin is totally separate from what's happening in crypto. And I, instead of being like anti-crypto, I tried to just be like, just don't say Bitcoin and Ethereum. Just don't say Bitcoin and crypto. Try to separate them. But we're here. Everybody says Bitcoin and Ethereum. Everybody says Bitcoin and crypto. And that's the thing that kind of like, I wonder how you like parse that, because, you know, you get narratives that emerge from influential people like Mark Cuban or Raoul Pal or some of these guys, which you have really respectful conversations and seems like good relationships with, that actually contribute to the network effects of these coins like Ethereum. Like if Raoul Pal didn't actually jump on the Ethereum bandwagon, I really don't think a lot of those Wall Street guys would have gotten into DeFi and start writing analysis reports and start coming up with all these models to value DeFi coins like they value stocks. But here we are, like, you know, you got Jim Bianco putting .eth in his name and putting out research reports on DeFi coins. Like, I don't think that he really understands what he's promoting, but Raoul Pal has a lot of respect. He's a node in the network effect, in the Metcalfe's law. Like he's a valuable node in the Metcalfe's law equation, even though that's not really like a good way to value a cryptocurrency. Yeah. But like, how do you think about that? Where I know you play it like really politically and like you're gleaming value from people and you're not trying to like isolate yourself from them. And it seems to be working because you're at least influencing them towards Bitcoin, it seems. But like, does it frustrate you sometimes when you see like Mark Cuban say Dogecoin is better than Bitcoin? Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So like, I think you have to remember a couple of things, right? One is, I always try to find like, first, let's start with like, where's the common ground, right? And I actually think that Mark believes, use him as an example, Bitcoin has value, right? I think Raul believes that as well. I believe all of these folks say it. What's hard about the internet is the nuance gets lost. So if somebody says, you know, you use Mark saying Dogecoin is better than Bitcoin. That's not his whole sentence. What he says is Dogecoin is better than Bitcoin.
But that's where I stopped listening.
I understand that. But here's a good example, right? Here's the way that I think about it, right? Again, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily right or wrong, but this is how I think about it. Is if we simply just stop listening once they say something like that, then all of a sudden we missed the second half of the conversation, which in his situation ends up being something like it has low fees or it's got fast, you know, transaction times or whatever the logic is. And there's part of it being, well, that's because not that many people are using it, right? Ultimately, if you think of kind of a layer one blockchain, there's a finite amount of space. If there's tons of competition to use it, then of course the throughputs will go slower and slower, and the fees will go up in price until there's some sort of release valve. Now, Bitcoin, actually, and this is a very interesting analysis. If you go back and you look at the fees on layer one for Bitcoin versus Ethereum, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase my off the top of my head, the memory of fees. Bitcoin, if everyone remembers, in 2017 and into the beginning of 2018, had very high fees. Remember, everyone was like, oh, it's slow, it's expensive, it's all this stuff. The average fee now for a Bitcoin transaction is down under $5, right? But at one point it was like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 bucks, whatever it was the average, right? And it spiked higher than that at certain points in time, but on average.
I think it was actually to like 10 was like the average, and it spiked sometimes to like 15, 20, 30.
Yeah. So like, I don't want to get into the exact thing because I don't remember exactly what it is. But if you go back and you look, so like I'm just pulling up very, very quickly in, what is this? In April
November
of 2021, the average transaction fee, it's April of 2021. The average transaction fee was $62. And then I think that I can probably, sorry for doing this live here. If I go back, what is this? This is in
April 2021 was $60.
It's $60. And then
that's Bitcoin or that's Ethereum?
This is Bitcoin, average transaction fee. This is coming from bitinfocharts.com. So again, could be the wrong information source. I don't think so. But also the average transaction fee on December 21st, 2017 at the top was $54, $55, right? So now here's why this is important. Because this specifically is around Bitcoin. So at the top of the 2017 market, it spiked to about $55. At the somewhat top of the like April timeframe of 2021, it was $58 or so. But if we go and we do that same exact thing for Ethereum, and actually before I leave this, the average fee right now is under $2. So on January 30th, 2022, it's $1.93, right? And it's been kind of under $2 for the last month or so. If we then go and we look at the average Ethereum gas price, right? And we say, okay, well, what exactly is that? What we can find is that let's go back 5 years here. In 2018, on January 8th, the average gas price was $73. Then it spiked to $86 in the summer of 2018. It then spiked to $195 in 2019. In 2020, June, it spiked to $700. And then it spiked to $538 in September of 2020. And then now it sits somewhere in the $134, $130, $140 range. So the reason why I bring this up is right now, the average Ethereum gas fee is higher than ever over the last 5 years of Bitcoin in terms of the average transaction fee. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that is true. One of the big things is that Bitcoin is being used as a store of value. 70% of people haven't sold their Bitcoin who hold it, who are long-term holders. So that naturally reduces the number of transactions on a blockchain, but that doesn't mean that they're not users. They're protecting their purchasing power. It's a different type of use case. Whereas when you look at something like Ethereum, it's all about transactions. So NFTs, DeFi, all this stuff, right? There's tons and tons of transactions. And so you would expect fees to spike because there's a lot of throughput. Now, the other thing is that Bitcoin has successfully built layer 2 in the Lightning Network. And so if you were to take off the transactions of the Lightning Network and put it onto the layer 1, the fees would probably be much higher on layer 1 of Bitcoin. But what we have not yet seen is that same thing happen on Ethereum and elsewhere, because the fees are still, right? January 27, 2022, according to ycharts.com, the average gas price of Ethereum is $150. Today, on January 30th, 2022, is $134. And so naturally, what my point here is that as a network matures like Bitcoin, what you want to see is actually that the fees are going down over time. And that's what we've seen with Bitcoin. Bitcoin continues to build technology to actually relieve pressure at layer 1. Layer 1 is for security. Layer 2 is now for scalability. We've seen fees come down to another under $2. Pretty good progress. Ethereum has gone the opposite way. If you go back to 2017, in March, it was $22. Then it was 27. Then we get into 18. Then it spiked, right? And now all of a sudden, the average fee's up in that $100+ range. And so ultimately, Ethereum, if we use them as an example, they're going to have to make some progress. And they can either make progress by creating the layer 2s. They can transition to some sort of ETH 2.0 or whatever they want to call it. Or they're going to get their lunch eaten by competition from the Binance Smart Chains, the Solanas, the Polkadots, the whoever. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know who wins that whole competition. But what I do know is that when you're building in the technology revolution, you have two wars going on. You have the internal war of we got to do better here. We got to build layer 2. We got to do all this stuff. And you've got the external war, which is we got to fight off our competition. We got to keep users from going to these other platforms, etc. That's a hard battle to fight, internal and external. Bitcoin, it has an internal war. The internal war of Bitcoin is just, can we improve it faster than it takes for people to be onboarded? And so far, we've actually been doing a pretty good job of that. And you see that in something like the fees. But I think the narrative of Bitcoin's fees are high is the public narrative, but it's completely misplaced. The average fee compared to the average gas price on Ethereum shows that. And so that's opened the door for some of these other pieces of technology. Now, again, it goes back to like comparing a smart contract platform with Bitcoin to me is like comparing Amazon stock and oil, right? It's like they're not comparable. They're not trying to do the same thing. It just comes down to, again, as these Wall Street kind of investors, people who have built companies in the legacy market, as they come into this new industry, what they're looking for is they're looking for things that they understand. And Bitcoin is actually a 180-degree difference than almost anything else that they understand or that they've interacted with. There's a human-led monetary policy in the fiat system. Bitcoin is a programmatic monetary policy, 180-degree difference. There is a variable monetary policy. There's a fixed monetary policy in Bitcoin, right? 180-degree difference. There is a human-led central bank. There's an automated central bank in Bitcoin. There is a centralized monetary system. Well, Bitcoin is a decentralized one. Every single step of the way, it's a 180-degree difference. That means that you literally have to violate your previously thoughts about store of value, medium of exchange, etc., in order to understand Bitcoin and realize its value. If you look in the technology revolution bucket, there's a ton of stuff there that looks a lot like the old world, right? DeFi is basically financial services that is quote unquote decentralized. Now we can debate whether it's actually decentralized or not or whatever. So I'm not surprised that these individuals go and kind of gravitate there because it's easier for them to understand because it maps to something that they previously had. The big question is that where the real value is going to get created? I think you and I would probably argue no, right, over the long term. What we've seen from previous iterations of technology, like the creation of the internet, et cetera, is that simply taking the old heuristic and just mapping it with the new technology ends up usually not actually being that value creation or that value accretive over a long period of time. In the short term, you can get some winners. But ultimately, if you look at the internet, most of today's companies, there was no comparison to previous eras of technology. What was the equivalent of Google? The library, right? Like what was that equivalent, right? If you look at Facebook, like what was the equivalent? The phone book, right? Like what was that? If you look at Uber, people would be like, oh, it's a taxi company. Like, no, there's a ton of people who don't own cars now because they have Uber. Airbnb, like, was it hotels? Kind of. But ultimately, there was new iterations. There was something new about the technology that unlocked a 0 to 1 type moment. I think Bitcoin is the perfect example where once you created this technological kind of breakthrough, it solved a very specific problem. That very specific problem now empowered with this solution, the creation of digital decentralized money. And it is a $1 trillion asset. This other stuff, I think there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out where value is going to reside. I actually, and this is kind of breaking from what I think a lot of people would think is like the Bitcoin maximalist view of the world. I don't think everything else is a zero, right? I actually think that there will be immense value created in this other area. I just don't think it's going to be nearly as disruptive as Bitcoin is in terms of its impact on the world. And I also think that a lot of that other stuff is just the moving of the chessboard. Right? It's similar to like what Wall Street does. Wall Street basically says, I'm one bank, I'll send you some money, you send me some money back, and let's do it a couple more times and we'll take fees every time. And when we do that, then you and I get rich and our clients are sitting there like, oh, I don't know, like maybe we made money, maybe we didn't, right? When it comes to Bitcoin, I actually think that the part of the story that usually doesn't get told is the philanthropic impact that it will have. And what I mean by that is Right now, if you boil down many, not all, but many problems in the world, it ultimately, from a first principle standpoint, it resides at the base level, which is the corruption of money. And when you solve the corruption of money, from a first principle standpoint, you solve a lot of problems in the world. And so I think that Bitcoin specifically, if it reaches global adoption, which I think it will, that will have a bigger impact on the world than all philanthropy combined. Because philanthropy usually is not a first kind of a first order effect or a first principles way of solving a problem. It's usually a Band-Aid. It's usually something that is reactive to the problem. But to actually solve the problem, you have to go to the root cause. And the root cause is the corruption of money for many problems in the world. This other stuff, if I was to ask you, what's the first principles kind of solution? Sure, maybe you boil it down, you're like, well, it's faster trading times, or it's, there's no middleman or something like that. But ultimately, it's not the same from an impact standpoint. And so for me, I'm much more intellectually curious in the Bitcoin impact on the world than I am about making money. I could make way more money if I just went tomorrow and I was like, you know what? Like, Pomp's open for business, right?
Yeah, BitBoy model.
like
50K a shill. Let's go.
Like Pomp's open for business. Now, there is, I think, a line, and kind of bringing it back to your question about a number of people from like the Wall Street world or other folks, is I don't think it's fair or appropriate for Bitcoiners to just relentlessly attack these individuals, because I think when you do that, what you do is you turn them off. You actually make it harder. They dig their heels in the ground. There's a mimetic response to it, right? If I just every day yell at you, F you, F you, F you, what are you going to do? Your response is like, no, dude, F you, right? And then it ends up kind of in an all-out war. Instead, what I think ends up being really interesting is saying to someone, listen, I understand your logic here, right? I think the market's the referee. I have a different view of the world. Let's see what happens. And you can still be friends over it. And ultimately what you get is you're more likely to kind of either meet in the middle, pull them to your side, et cetera, over time. And so I think a lot about...
Do you think that you have had like an impact on some of these more influential people that like maybe they came more towards the Bitcoin logic, like that you just described, where they actually understand what you just said? Because what you said is how I think about it too. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, when they're like more nuanced about the way they think about DeFi and crypto and stuff like that, they can see that like, yeah, it's not going to go to zero. It'll probably still be a multi-trillion-dollar asset in 10 years, but Bitcoin will be $100 trillion asset. It's a different thing. But like, do you feel like, because, the narrative that's coming out that I see from Grayscale, Bank of America, people like that, like very influential folks that are saying, like putting out research saying Ethereum is a triple point asset. It's got all the characteristics of Bitcoin. Plus now it's more deflationary than Bitcoin because of EIP 1559. So the stock to flow ratio is better. So here, go buy ETH, because even though the fees are high and it's a liveliness failure, it's still going to be better money and it's a better investment. Like, you see a lot of bad logic getting thrown out by Grayscale, Bank of America, institutions like that are actually encouraging people to go put pension money into Curve and Yield Farm and get put like $100 billion into a yield farm and get
here's the way I think
interest.
About it. And I think that this is again, it's hard to kind of have this conversation on Twitter, so it's best in video or podcast, etc. But I think actually the challenge for the Bitcoin community moving over the next 5 or 10 years is, rather than be the attackers, can we be the educators? And what I mean by that is the difference between attacking someone is you essentially are starting out with the default, they're not going to listen, right? Because now you're just going to punch and punch and punch and punch. Instead, when you think about it from an education standpoint, the key piece to education, right, if you're a teacher, is the students have to be listening. So you have to assume that they're going to listen, right? And what I think is a lost kind of understanding of a lot of folks from the finance world is, I know people all over various industries. The number one truth seekers that I know are actually hedge fund managers, which is a little bit of a counterintuitive thing, because most people think of, big bag hedge funds, oh, these guys are just trying to make a dollar or whatever. I have literally seen some of the most successful hedge fund managers in the world go into a room with very, very strong thoughts on a topic, be told 3 or 4 new data points, and immediately change their mind. And so ultimately, if you believe that doing the work, getting presented with new information, and being willing to change your mind is a sign of intelligence, we have to understand that the people that we actually want to become sympathetic to the Bitcoin cause, to work on Bitcoin, et cetera, we're going to have to give them new information and help change their mind, right? Now, I think that the other part of that argument, and you asked in terms of like my impact personally on individuals, I have no clue. Right. I don't spend a lot of time on it. I frankly don't think my opinion matters. Respectfully to you, I don't think your opinion or anybody else's opinion matters. I think that the market's going to determine what ends up being successful or not. And, we're here to kind of guide and share our opinions. But frankly, whether I like Bitcoin or not, Bitcoin's going to be successful or not without me. Right. Same for many other people. And so I think that the reason why that's important is because I think when we take an approach and we say to folks like everything else is a zero, automatically we get maybe not disqualified, but discredited to a degree when somebody comes and says, well, hold on, these folks are all saying this is all a zero, but it keeps growing. It keeps grabbing developer activity. It keeps grabbing users. It keeps grabbing economic value. And I tend to think from an investing perspective that there's this law that I'll paraphrase from science, which is like things in motion tend to stay in motion. That's not always true. There's always the outlier examples of something that was hot and ended up not being. But I do think that what we have to understand is, look, Bitcoin has a very specific mission in the world. We should not try to make Bitcoin solve everything. Instead, what we should do is we should remain laser focused on what Bitcoin is here to do. And let's go make sure that it wins that. And by the way, if somebody wants to use technology to do something else, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I also don't think you or I or anybody else has the the virtuous high ground to tell them you shouldn't do that. Because I think that the second that you start to try to outlaw or pressure people from doing experimentation and kind of the scientific method, if you will, right around this stuff, then what you get is you actually lose a lot of the research and development. And so if you think about Bitcoin has drastically benefited from a lot of failed R&D projects, right? How many things have people tried to build using blockchain technology or digital technologies? They end up failing. Like they just don't work, right? People lose money. Like it's an absolute like dumpster fire. And the Bitcoiners, frankly, historically online have like danced on the graves, right, of these projects and been like, oh, we told you that wasn't going to work. But then we're like, but you know what? That wasn't that horrible of an idea. It's just we should do it on top of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin security, decentralization, et cetera, means that it'll work. And so I do think that understanding that there's nuance in this and realizing I have no clue what the future holds, and neither does anybody else, it goes back to this kind of intellectual humility, which is there are scams, and we should call them out loudly and literally make sure everyone knows the scams. But I don't know, maybe majority of the things that people are calling scams, what they end up actually saying is, if you really unpack it, because I've DM'd some people and I see like a Bitcoin and they're like, oh, this is a scam. They're freaking out, right? I'm like, hey, just listen, behind closed doors, I'll never repeat what you are saying, right? But I just want to understand. And I'll never attribute it to you, right? Like in terms of what they say to me. But I say, explain to me why you think it's a scam. And by the way, like, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to buy it, right? Like, I don't think that it has value, but like, why do you think it? And usually what it comes down to is like misleading marketing. It's not actually they think the technology is wrong. It's not that they don't think the users are real, all this stuff. So it's like a classic example is somebody says that they have a decentralized something and a Bitcoiner will say like it's not decentralized, which I think is a fair critique. But I think that what ends up actually being abrasive, which sometimes is valuable, sometimes is not, is when we start yelling scam, people think that it's like a Ponzi scheme. No, it's just like it's not decentralized. And are we better off actually, rather than saying scam, 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 saying, oh, this just isn't decentralized. Here's why. Like, could we actually recruit more people to understand a certain viewpoint by being more nuanced? And so rather than put the burden on others to kind of figure out like, what do we mean by scam? Instead, what if we took on the burden of being better communicators about why do we think this isn't valuable? Oh, because not decentralized. Here's why we think that. And I'm willing to bet we can convert more people to see our view of the world.
I really like that idea. And personally, that's kind of what I've tried to make the choice to do over the last few years. Like I was very, I was into like altcoins and stuff before the fork wars. Like I was investing in blockchain, medical technology, and all this crap that was going on in 2017. And I worked for a crypto fund. I worked for Alphabet. They were like a crypto fund. So, I mean, I was on the committee that was making the decisions on what to invest in. So I like saw like 70 deals during that whole cycle. And I was totally like entrenched in that, and actually was starting to think like, I guess blockchain can disrupt some of these things. There's red tape in the medical industry. Yeah, sure. Anonymizing patient records and putting it on a blockchain. Maybe there's something there. Like all the different ideas that you hear, like kind of repeated this cycle. But
you're not alone, by the way. This is an important point. You're not alone in that. There are some of the most hardcore toxic Bitcoiners today all came through that same path. They ran shitcoin funds, the whole 9 yards, right? And like in some way, people have tried to scrub that from their history. I actually think it's more powerful if somebody says, hey, I came in and I did something else and I spent all this time, money, energy, etc., doing this. And now I think that this thing is the thing I want to focus on. Not even the thing that necessarily is going to be the most valuable or you can make the most money on, or just like this is where I choose to focus on. That's why I always tell people, like, I actually started out mining Ethereum, right? And when I started out mining Ethereum, I was mining it at over. I started out mining it at like $8, $9, $10, $11, $12, whatever it was, right? And it literally in the beginning of 2017, it went from like $10 to $30 to $50 to $100. And by like May, it was $100. And I thought I was an absolute genius when I sold it all at $150. Regardless of what you think of Ethereum, right? It is completely disproven that that was a smart financial decision. Because guess what? Now it's trading at thousands of dollars, and rather than sell it at 150, if you're a pure capitalist, you should have held it till it was selling at, thousands of dollars. Now, with that said, over time, I actually became more and more kind of informed and educated about Bitcoin. I think that there's a tweet, and I try not to delete any of my tweets unless I made a really bad grammatical error or I tweet something about politics and people start. I
remember the tweet you're going to say, right? Ethereum one day is going to be worth more than Bitcoin with a bigger market cap, more transaction volume.
There's two tweets.
Okay, there's two tweets.
There's two tweets that the Ethereum community loves to always go back to, and I stand by these tweets, right? Which is the first one was I said something about Bitcoin, basically like I wouldn't hold Bitcoin or something at the time, and based on the view of what I had at the time, which was an uninformed view, I was quote unquote right based on the information I had. But as I learned more about it, obviously I switched my mind, right? And I changed my mind and I ended up doing something different. The second one is Ethereum. What I said was, I think I said that it'll have a bigger market cap, and I forget what the other part of the tweet was. But
more transaction volume.
More transaction volume. So guess what? I'm right on one of them already, right? Which is that it has more transactions. But the thought process was that Bitcoiners are going to hold the Bitcoin, right? It is valuable. They don't want to spend it. They don't want to say to send it to people, etc. So already we checked off one of those two things. The second thing is, and this gets lost in the conversation, I'm not saying that it's good or bad that Ethereum ends up being bigger from a market cap standpoint. But when you don't have a finite supply, you can just keep issuing as much as you want, and eventually you can out-issue what the finite supply is. Now, again, without getting into, is that good or bad, I think that there has to be, and there should be, the ability for people to evolve their thinking. If you're still thinking the same way that you were 5 years ago, like something's wrong. Right? Like there's something. There's got to either be an evolution, there's got to be improvement, there's got to be something. It doesn't mean you got to change your mind. Right? Doesn't mean that every 5 years you should change your mind on everything. It just means that you should be growing personally. And so I definitely think I've done that. I think a lot of folks in the Bitcoin community have. But again, and this is like one of those messages that I have this is me specifically talking to the Bitcoin community, but understanding that other people are going to listen to this is.
Well, by the way, I don't have many Bitcoiners listening to my show.
No, why?
Because I'm not a toxic maxi. So like, I don't say the right things. They like troll me. So because I will be more nuanced in my discussion. So they'll block me and call me a shitcoin or whatever. I mean, might surprise you that I get that, but even I get that.
It's like, it's kind of like cancel culture, right? Cancel culture ends when those doing the canceling get canceled. All of a sudden it was like, oh, whatever. And I think what we've seen in the Bitcoin community is that the most hardcore Bitcoiners, the people who you and I have a ton of respect for, our peers, our colleagues, etc., at every turn, they go after somebody. Right. And I don't want to name names and kind of walk through it.
I'm guilty of doing that. I can think of
5 to 10 people who are actually here. I'll give you no, I don't want to say names. I can think of 5 to 10 people right now that were on a pedestal in the Bitcoin community. And at some point they said something and Bitcoiners absolutely swarmed and went after them. Now, part of me says, okay, I get it. The cyber hornets and defending Bitcoin and all this stuff. But I think that when you essentially say, we're going to draw a box, and if you don't believe what we believe, you're out, that's not very healthy. And so ultimately, I think that what we have to allow for is the nuanced discussion. And I think that if folks want to come after me, right? Let's take, for example, here's a good example. In August of 2020, I wrote a piece and I said, digital art is a next big bet and NFTs are going to be massive. That was well before a majority of people who follow me and read this email, et cetera, had ever heard of NFTs, right? Guess what? I was right. That doesn't mean that I love Bitcoin any less. It doesn't mean that I think differently about Bitcoin, et cetera. It just, to me, after I'd done literally about 4 months of work, it was very obvious to me that there was both momentum in the market, there was technology, and there was companies being built where this sector was going to explode. Now, as an investor, that's my job, is to understand this stuff, right? Doesn't mean necessarily that I have to go and I have to buy it. Doesn't mean that I have to go and tell other people to buy it, etc. But what ended up happening was, here's the craziest part. I was right about the NFT explosion. I really didn't make that much money on that thesis because what ended up happening was intellectually, I was still spending majority of my time on Bitcoin. But if I had just said, you know what, okay, I'm done with Bitcoin. Now I'm going to move to this NFT thing and I'm going to go deploy capital. I'm going to buy all these NFTs. I'm going to go and invest in all the infrastructure, et cetera. I'd have made a ton of money. But it goes back to like, what is somebody optimizing for?
But you would have lost a lot of your reputation too with Bitcoin.
Not only would you lose reputation,
you would have been like probably way more followed and like influence in crypto temporarily, I think, while this market's a bubble. But if you're playing the long game, I think you made the right choice. But
it's also, and I think that the nuance here is, are you just trying to simply make more money? And there's plenty of people who do. It's super impactful for their life. And I don't judge anyone for saying to themselves, hey, my goal right now is I'm optimizing for money. But what I'm optimizing for is something different, right? And so that doesn't mean...
What are you optimizing for?
I think that there is an opportunity to stop complaining about majority of the mainstream media, of financial press, et cetera. And I basically optimize for three things. One, on the content side, is I think that we can build something better, right? I think that we can literally build bigger platforms. We can build more engaged communities. And I think that we can ultimately reach more people by simply talking about our view of the world rather than having to point and say, oh, these people are wrong. These people are wrong. Look how stupid they are. They keep writing these dumb articles that Bitcoin's dead, yada, whatever. And one of the key pieces to that is I've essentially inverted the way that the mainstream media thinks about finance. The mainstream media thinks of stocks and bonds as the core assets, and this Bitcoin crypto thing is cute, but it's a sideshow. I just inverted. For people under the age of 35 globally, Bitcoin and the crypto industry, which is a key piece, is the main show, and stocks and bonds are the sideshow. And so when you start to have that viewpoint, you think about things differently. You talk about them differently. So that's optimization number one, is I think we can build something better. The second thing is I spent a lot of time thinking about, as an overall industry, what are the things that I'm uniquely positioned to contribute that would be difficult for other people to do and that are not competitive with the work of other people. I don't want to compete with other people. And that's ultimately where I ended up on the employment business. I said, you know what? You can yell and scream all you want. It's really hard to complain when you're helping people get a job, right? You may not like the company they go work at. You may not like the fact that they're working in a certain location or on a certain technology, whatever. That's all up for debate. But ultimately, if you can help change people's lives by getting them a job, that's a pretty good thing. Most people will say, you know what? That's cool. That individual made a free market decision of where they want to work, but you helped them facilitate getting that job. And so I spent a lot of time trying to do that. We've already helped hundreds of people get hired. We think that we can literally help tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over the coming years get jobs in this industry. And
how is that going, by the way? Like, I've been following like your Pomp jobs thing in the summer, at least. I was kind of trying to follow it. Is it like there's tons of jobs in the Lightning Network industry? It's just you can't even hire somebody right now. Is it like
there's not a job opening problem? That's for sure in this industry. Everyone in the world is hiring. And so really, when you think about the disconnect, it's trying to convince people to come work in the industry. right? It's not a, hey, let's go get more companies to be hiring. It's the exact opposite. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time, right? If you think about it, it's how do we educate people? How do we then convince them that they should come work in this industry and help connect them to those opportunities? And then the last one is I spend a lot of my time, frankly, thinking about what are the things in the world outside of Bitcoin and crypto that I'm uniquely positioned to do in order to have a positive impact? Sometimes that's provide capital. Sometimes that's provide my time. Sometimes that's provide awareness, etc. But I think a lot about this idea of, in the old system, most rich people, most people who are successful, who have any sort of audience or power or influence, etc., they think of a direct connection between I donate money and I'm a good person because I did that. Sure, donating money is great, right? And that can be super valuable. But there's this whole new world now where you can do positive things in the world, not just with donating money. You can also do things like bring awareness. You can also do things by teaching people things. You can also do things by helping to empower people on certain things. So Bitcoin is probably the best example from a technology standpoint. Is imagine if you could actually help somebody learn how to protect their purchasing power. Pretty freaking powerful,
that's huge,
right?
Especially globally.
Of course. So one of the stats that I think blows people's minds is our YouTube audience, 55%, majority of folks are international, not domestic in North America. And so when you think about that, it's a global phenomenon. And how do we continue to accelerate that over time? And so, look, I don't have all the answers by any means. Frankly, I think that I spend more time trying to learn from other people than I do actually teaching people things. And that's why I do the podcast, et cetera. Is I get to just bring people on, ask them a ton of questions, and I almost get to kind of steal their knowledge, right? It's like a selfish thing. But at the same time, I record the conversation and try to share with as many people as I can. And so I think that's a huge piece of this is if we can wrap our heads around how do we continue to push forward the mission we have, but do it in this almost like diplomatic way where we say to folks, listen, you are entitled to whatever opinion you want. I'm not going to judge you for your opinions. But what I can do is I can tell you what my opinion is. I can tell you how I think the world's going to unfold. And then the market's going to decide. What you get is over time, there's a lot of people like you and I who started out working on all kinds of crazy stuff. And then they slowly get more and more educated. And then they start to spend more time on Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, et cetera. And so my big thing is just like, don't alienate people, right? Like you can actually be nice, like kill people with kindness, right? And it's harder.
So hard though, man. It's so hard.
It takes longer. It's harder. I get it, right? By the way, I'm just as guilty as anybody. I love a good dunk on Twitter. I love a good meme, right? I'm an absolute shithead sometimes too, right? But if you can just try to remember that over and over again, it's like kill people with kindness, kill people with kindness. What ends up happening is I think you end up being more effective over the long run. In the short run, it's way better just to punch somebody, kind of virtually, right? And just say, oh, you're an idiot. Over the long run, though, you end up being more effective by, I think, trying to be a little bit more diplomatic.
I think, going back 10 minutes ago or whatever, when we were talking about like this having a nuanced discussion versus saying something's a scam. I mean, I agree with you. There's a lot of PTSD, though, from Bitcoiners on Twitter going through the block size war and debating with the big blockers about all these conspiracies and trying to actually like suss out what is Bitcoin. Actually, like they wanted to kind of like redefine what Bitcoin was. And there was this kind of huge, long battle on Twitter. And there was many engaging discussions and nuanced discussions with big blockers and crypto people and VCs and stuff. But, it kind of felt like the VCs turned their back on Bitcoin and were just like took a step back and be like, whatever wins is going to be Bitcoin. And then we're going to go start investing in crypto and Ethereum and all that because they can do the pre-mine thing and like replicate the unicorn gains. And it kind of felt like a slog for a long time. And then it felt to me like in the bear market, the thesis was kind of proven out. Bitcoiners were right. Like these utility coins don't really have that much value. So it became more of like a confidence sort of thing of just like, that's a scam, like the pre-mine's a scam, whatever. And I do agree with you 100% that it's better to go and have a real nuanced discussion and like try to influence them in some way towards Bitcoin knowledge without saying the word scam or just calling it a scam or whatever. But it's so much work.
People get upset when I say this. Every single Bitcoiner that runs a company pre-mined their equity, right? And again, that is not necessarily a bad thing. Ultimately, that is the economic model that they've chosen, which, by the way, is proven now by decades and decades and decades of businesses where that is a super effective way to organize people, capital, and kind of effort. And
well, wait, let's get into that discussion 1 second, because I want to get your thoughts on this one. Like, what do you think is a strategic, actionable thing that Bitcoin maxis can do that when they're having a face-to-face conversation or a podcast conversation, they're going to be a lot more nuanced and in their discussion. They're not going to say you're a scammer, that's a scam, goodbye. Like, they're going to
most of them won't.
Be more
some of them are off the chain.
Yes, for sure. There are a lot of like, you know, but I do think it's like a kind of, you know, there's when there's a lot of engaged people in a community, it's like the 2% most engaged people are going to be railing on Twitter all the time. So the reality of what a Bitcoin maximalist is skewed by the like 1,000 Bitcoin maxis that have a toxic symbol in their name that are just calling everything a scam and everyone a scammer. I really don't think that's an accurate portrayal of what Bitcoin maximalism is, but you got to have nuance in person or voice conversations to really get to the meat of it. But like, how do you think that we can actually be strategically more effective there? Because it's tough for a Bitcoin maximalist sort of person to get in front of these people, because it's just two, like you said, it's two totally separate worlds. Yeah. And they're not really trying to go out and seek challenges to their information. They're kind of seeking confirmation bias for the most part, what I understand. Like, listening to Twitter spaces about NFTs and DeFi and stuff, they don't want to engage with Bitcoin maximalists. I think, like, what do you think, man? Like, how can we be more effective stewards of Bitcoin knowledge? But
here's one of the key things, right? I spend so much time, energy, effort, right? Creating content and doing all this stuff. And again, my opinion doesn't matter, right? But I find it intellectually interesting, and hopefully I'm having some sort of contribution to the community and to what's going. I don't want to deal with assholes either, right? If I'm going to go somewhere, even if we agree on everything, literally down to the T, and somebody keeps telling me, you know, basically being an asshole to me, it's just like, dude, I got better things to do with my life. Right. And so I think that, like, that's true of everything. Forget Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, digital technologies, whatever. If you went to work every day and someone's just an asshole, even though they're on your team, you're like, dude, you got to stop, man. Right. Yeah. Like, please stop. And so I think that's kind of step number one. It's just like, we're all better off. Right. The whole, what is it? Make friends and influence people, or whatever the book is, right?
Oh yeah. How to win friends and influence people.
Yeah. Like the whole, like, basically you can start that whole book with like, be nice to people. Right. For the most part. And it's like, that probably is pretty effective here as well. It's like, don't be an asshole. So I think that's step one. The second thing is, I think, again, it goes back to this idea of the teacher, right? Are they actually looking to learn? And if somebody's looking to learn, then engage. That's perfect. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of people who don't want to listen. Like, just pick a different market, right? It's like, if you've ever heard in entrepreneurship, there's this saying that when a good team meets a bad market, the market wins. And when a bad team meets a good market, the market wins. Same thing here is, like, if you have a great Bitcoin explainer and they're talking to the wrong kind of addressable market, they're never going to be successful. People don't want to hear them. They've already written them off, whatever. Just go pick a better market. Go pick a better audience. And then go spend your time there. Because ultimately what we have to understand is we're not
Wait, do you think, though, that, because, like, what I've been trying to do is go into, like, the shitcoin dens where the bad logic is being propagated, like go on BitBoy's show, or like go into Real Vision or something, and actually do like a nuanced conversation with their audience or the host or whatever, and like try to go where they're not seeking the information, but like maybe we can convert them from the crypto funnel back to the Bitcoin funnel, or at least like considering Bitcoin logic.
But I think that looking at it as either or ultimately sets us up for failure, right? Because here's the way that I think about it is, let's say that we were looking at stocks, right? And I was running Amazon, and I went and I met with you, and you were an investor, a potential partner, etc. And I said to you, hey, we've built this amazing company. I think that we're going to continue to change lives. We're going to create tons and tons of millionaires out of our employees. We're going to move packages around the world. We're going to provide amazing computing cloud services, etc. This is why we're valuable. If I spent the entire time in that pitch meeting, whether it was for an investor or a partner or whatever, talking about my competitors, you're like, that was weird, right? Instead, just saying, hey, look, this is what we've built. This is why we can solve your needs, etc. Really valuable. But I also wouldn't spend time then if I was Amazon saying like, by the way, Facebook, man, they suck. You definitely shouldn't use Facebook. Like, let me tell you about how they steal all your data, right? Or like whatever nonsense, right?
Okay, but hold on. That analogy, I don't know if it works right, because I get it. Yes, that's right. Like, that's what you're doing. You're building an audience that wants this information, and you're doing it really well. But like, I feel like the description you gave like a half an hour ago about the difference between crypto and Bitcoin is foundational knowledge everybody should know.
Correct.
They're not getting that at Real Vision. They're not getting any of that like separation of how to think about the investments, because it is very difficult to separate the technology narratives from the investment narrative and the money narrative.
But
and I think that we need to do that more. We need to like show them this is how you should be thinking about valuing these things. Fundamentally, there's risks here that you're not considering, Mr. DeFi investor guy.
But I think that you can do it in like a super diplomatic, like I've gone on Real Vision multiple times. I've done conversations with Raul. I've done conversations / debates with Mike Green, which maybe wasn't as
that was
as
a
polite.
Great debate.
Yeah,
no, I like that.
Because I
really
thought he was
good.
full of shit, and I called him out on it. But
it was powerful. It was good because, like, you know, well, who is he to say that Bitcoin's not patriotic when he's like benefiting from the money printer, sitting at home, not doing anything to defend the country? You know, it was a great debate. I'll give you kudos for that one for sure.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, that like maybe use me as an example. Right? I don't want to kind of project on anybody else or make assumptions about anybody else. But I've gone on Real Vision as an example, which I actually think they do fantastic work in a lot of ways, right? I was a Real Vision subscriber.
Interview's over again.
I was a Real Vision subscriber before they ever started doing any of the crypto work, right? Before I really saw Raul kind of go all in. He's been into Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for quite a while, frankly, longer than most people. But before they really started to put a concentrated effort there, because I liked their macro conversations. Thought they brought in great investors, etc. Now, with that said, I've gone on and I've had the super diplomatic conversations and said, hey, here's how I see the world. But I think part of being intellectually humble is also saying, by the way, I don't necessarily think that I have to be right. This is how I view the world. I've got skin in the game. I'm investing along these themes. If I'm wrong, I'm going to lose money. And therefore, that's how I have confidence in my viewpoint. At the same time, when I was debating somebody, right? Again, I can get in the mud with anybody. I grew up with 4 brothers, and we talk better shit than 90% of the folks who are on the internet. But understanding and frankly just being, I think, aware enough and mature enough to understand when to have which conversation is really important. Now, if you go into, let's say, a Twitter Spaces, right, bring this down to kind of a more real world example. If you go into a Twitter Space and somebody's literally like, "Hey, by the way, I built something that's better than Bitcoin, and it's going to be the next global reserve currency," and like all that, that's a different story than people are just talking about NFTs, right? And you go in and you're like, "Hey, by the way, like, I just want to make sure everyone here understands, like, there's a monetary revolution and a technology revolution, right? And like, if you're interested in learning about the monetary revolution, go check out this resource." Right. And so I think that like there is for sure bad actors. There are for sure people who are doing nefarious bad shit and calling them out.
There's a lot though, man. Like there's like the percentage of
Let me ask
bad
you this.
actors.
How many people that you perceive to be a bad actor do you think are intentionally trying to mislead people?
I don't think many of them are. I think honestly most of them are just like,
they think they're
caught
doing
up
the right thing
in the bubble. They're caught up in the bubble. They think, I guess this is a new way to like empower an artist. I'm going to go sell $1 million worth of JPEGs to you.
Well, like, but take that. All right. So let's use NFTs as a perfect example, right? And again, this is my opinion. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Who cares?
By the way, I'm part owner of NFT.com. Like I bought in before Kevin O'Leary got in. So like,
that makes you a shit coiner, and we should throw you out with the bathwater.
I'm a shit corner. That's why I get blocked, because I have a nuanced take on NFTs too. Like I believe NFTs long term are culturally relevant and they're not going away. But I think most of it's like a digital Beanie Baby bubble that's gonna blow up and get a lot of people wrecked and spill over to negative reputation on Bitcoin. But still, even after the carnage and the like, people are gonna start deleting their Ethereum wallets because they don't want to have any ties to having a JPEG that they bought for the price of a house and now it's worth $5. Like people would just be shamed in the streets for holding NFTs in their wallets that were worth $1 million one day and they didn't sell them. You rejected your CryptoPunk offer for $10 million. Like, what were you doing? I don't want you in my family anymore. That's what I think is going to happen whenever the bubble pops. Just kidding. But I do think everybody's going to get wrecked for the most part. But still, even out of that, NFTs it's just digital collectibles. It's digital game items, digital art. If people are going to value digital money, it makes 100% sense that they will also want to collect digital collectibles. But I think it'll scale out more like an OnlyFans subscription, or like supporting somebody on Patreon, or paying like a super chat on a YouTube. Like it'll be like getting an autograph from someone at a Comic-Con, like a celebrity. You're not going to be paying $10,000 to get an autograph from your favorite celebrity at Comic-Con. I think it's just going to scale out that there'll be trillions of NFTs. Everybody will be doing it. Therefore, it's just going to be like any other internet technology. It's not empowering artists the way that they're selling it right now. It's actually just like a marketing thing. It's a temporary bubble. That's the way I think about it.
In 1993, Hal Finney, which I have the utmost respect for, I think most people do as well. I don't want to read into this. I don't want to project what his intentions with this post were, but I think it's important as a kind of a contextual piece of information. Hal Finney in 1993 wrote, "Giving a little more thought to the idea of buying and selling digital cash, I thought of a way to present it. We're buying and selling cryptographic trading cards. Fans of cryptography will love these fascinating examples of the cryptographic arts. Notice the fine way the bit patterns fit together, a mix of one-way functions and digital signatures, along with random blinding. What a perfect conversation piece to be treasured and shown to your friends and family. Plus, your friends will undoubtedly love these cryptographic trading cards just as much. They'll be eager to trade for them. Collect the whole set. They come in all kinds of varieties, from the common ones to the rarer 50s, all the way up to the seldom seen 1000s. Hours of fun can be had for all. Your friendly cryptographic trading card dealer wants to join the fun too. He'll be as interested in buying your trading cards back as in selling them. Try this.
You got to read that in an old-timey voice.
And timely new hobby today. Now, the reason why I say
your favorite your cypherpunk card dealer, see, is on the side of the street waiting for your shilling.
But here's why it's fascinating to me, is that the first sentence is giving a little more thought to the idea of buying and selling digital cash. I thought of a way to present it. So it's very clear that Hal is thinking about digital cash, etc. Right? Yeah. But in 1993, he's talking about digital trading cards and rarity and like all these topics that are now coming up. And so again, it goes back to like, I have no clue what Hal Finney thinks. I have no clue what he intended by this post. I have no clue if he would be into NFTs or he'd think they're the biggest shit coins in the world. I have no clue, right? And I don't think that any of us should try to guess what they have. But as you learn more about Bitcoin, you start to see things like this, which again, just make you think. Right? It makes you understand it. So I think the number one thing is like everyone should just learn as much as they possibly can about not only Bitcoin, but what came before it. There's 40, 50 years of cryptographic research and proof of work and consensus mechanisms and ethos, et cetera, that all go into the creation of Bitcoin. But also what I find fascinating is that so many of these individuals who either did work before Bitcoin or were involved in the early days, how intellectually curious they were around technology, et cetera. And so I think that one of the best things I've done is I've just said, look, I am no longer in the game of trying to judge other people for what they like or don't like. And by the way, if you think something's a scam, you may be right or you may be wrong. I don't know until I go and I do the work myself. And I always say that we've got this like critical thinking crisis in America, right? It's really a critical thinking crisis globally. But that critical thinking crisis means that one, you got to go get the source information, go do the work yourself. And two is then do the work to think through what do you think is actually going to be valuable or not. And I personally have come to the conclusion that I think Bitcoin is going to be wildly more valuable in the future than it is today. Whether you measure that over 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years, or literally 100 years after I die. That's what I think. NFTs, sounds like I'm pretty similar to you. They're going to be a thing. They already are a thing. They're a hundreds of billions of dollar market cap. Which ones are going to work? Which ones not? I don't know. I don't spend enough time on it. I couldn't tell you whether a crypto punk is going to be worth more or less in the future. What do you call it? The apes, the
rare pepes,
rare pepes, like all these. I don't know. I have no clue whether they're going to be more valuable or not in the future. So guess what? I don't buy them. Why don't I buy them? Not because I don't think that they're going to be valuable, because I have no freaking clue. And so if I don't have a clue, then don't buy it. And by the way, if I don't know, then I probably shouldn't be commenting on whether they got value or not, or whether they're a scam or not, because I don't have a view on that world. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's an important piece of this, is that ultimately the internet has made all of us very short attention spans. And also it has emboldened all of us to have an opinion on everything. I'm just as guilty as everybody else on that. But the more you can just remind yourself like, man, you know what? I only got so many hours in the day. I really actually can only talk in super nuanced kind of detail about a couple of things in the world. Let me just stick to that shit, right? And I'll leave everything else to others. Then all of a sudden you start to focus. And I think that, if you look at somebody like a Michael Saylor, right? And Michael and I have talked about this, and I really respect him for his ability to focus. He thinks about Bitcoin. He talks about Bitcoin. Everything else, I don't think I've ever heard him say anything negative about other things. I don't think I've ever seen him go after anybody. I don't think that he's ever been super abrasive to a person on the internet or other projects, etc. Doesn't matter. He's focused.
Have you seen him on Up Only? His recent appearance on Kobe's
only
show?
About a third of the way through it. Did he break his really streak? Did he go after anybody?
No, actually, he, Saylor's a funny one because like when Saylor first came on the scene, again, I'm like, don't trust verify. I don't trust anybody. I got burnt by so many crypto influencers and stuff in the past. I've been in Bitcoin since 2011. I lost coins in Mt. Gox, trusting Roger Ver. Like I've lived the not your keys, not your coins. Don't trust verify. It's not just memes to me. Right. So when Saylor came on the scene, I'm like, who is this charlatan? He's like, what's his scheme? What's his scam? Like, what's he doing? And, I took like a good 4 months before I kind of respected what he was saying. And it's funny because in Saylor's early kind of come up into the scene of the Bitcoin scene, it felt like he was actually more like a little bit like taking a stance and being like saying things like there is no second best. Ethereum is a shark duck that lives in trees, like stuff like that. He was taking a position. And then I think I talked to Eric Weiss, that's his friend that ended up getting him into Bitcoin. Yep. And I was like talking to him about this 2 weeks ago, actually, about like what we're talking about, like what's the best strategy to take, because this 2021 cycle played out way different than most of us thought. And Eric runs a fund and stuff. So I just want to talk to him about that. And, he said something that kind of like Saylor says a lot, which is that the goal for Bitcoin is like 100 trillion total addressable market cap or even higher for all the store of value that's leached into everything, real estate, stocks, whatever. And crypto right now is like a 1 trillion market cap or something, like 800 billion. So Eric's view is, he's not so much of a maximalist, but he like loves Bitcoin. He thinks Bitcoin is going to be super valuable. But his view on the strategic thing of like, don't disparage other things is that why go after the $800 billion market and like create friction and blow up your mentions with a bunch of Ripple people that are trying to argue with you about it versus go after the gold market, go after the real estate market, convince pension funds and convince sovereign wealth funds to just allocate 1%. And like, that's, kind of what you've been doing with Get Off Zero and things like that, and going on mainstream news and really preaching that message of like, just get off zero. So I can totally respect that. And Saylor has definitely shifted his language a little bit more. Like when he's asked about SHIB on TV, rather than saying something funny, he'll just be like, I'm just going to stay in my lane. I'm just not going to comment on that. Bitcoin is digital property. So like, but then you've got the maximalist army, the crowd swarm of Bitcoin educators and defenders and stuff who are kind of sitting there like a standing army that there's no battle going on. So they've kind of turned on each other and turned on Bitcoiners and start to like they missed the battle or something. I do agree that Bitcoiners on Twitter are a little bit too abrasive and not as nuanced. I think you're taking a really good strategy. You are having an effect, because if it weren't for you, like, and people like you that are really effectively using marketing and strategy to go and have a popular YouTube channel and help place people in jobs and write a newsletter that people get good Bitcoin information on, it would be just a cesspool of BitBoys and people with like YouTube channel thumbnails that look like this. So like, thank you for doing it. And like, Natalie Brunel's another person who I've just come to see as like an amazing underfollowed resource in Bitcoin. She's going to like resonate with so many new people that are going to come into Bitcoin, because the first 10 years of Bitcoin is not going to look like the next 10 years of Bitcoin. And the next billion people that come into Bitcoin are not going to look like the first, million people that came into Bitcoin. They're going to need to have representatives that they can feel welcome and feel like they're speaking a language they understand. So I'm super happy that like people are focusing on what you're talking about, which is, you know, doing what has the most impact. I guess I just got to figure out what I got to amplify or whatever.
I think the key to this whole thing is focusing on what you can control. And there are people who will be able to talk to a friend, a family member, whoever, and say, hey, you know, something that you believe is not right. A lot of people who just say, hey, look, I'm going to do my best to go find folks that I can educate from day one. And then, frankly, there's a lot of people who are going to say, you know what? I'm going to shut the hell up and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do what I need to do for me. And I'm not in the game of educating. I'm not in the game of, you know, content or talking to other people, etc. Some of the biggest Bitcoin proponents, some of the biggest Bitcoin holders, nobody knows their names. Nobody knows what they do behind the scenes, right? There are individuals. There's one who now is who is publicly known, owns a lot of Bitcoin, surprised a lot of people. Doesn't matter who it is. They had written to me, I don't know, 6 months before it became publicly known. I was shocked when I understood to the depths of which they had done the work, they understood, they held Bitcoin, etc. And it just reminded me, we have no clue. Right now, there are people who hold Bitcoin that if folks knew who they were, we'd be like, holy shit, right? So instead of focusing on all this other stuff, just focus. Just focus. And guess what? Majority of people are going to want stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, etc. And so rather than yell and scream at them because they bought some Bitcoin plus an NFT of an ape, and also they've got some yield farming or whatever, who am I to judge? Maybe they're optimizing for something different. Maybe they know something I don't know. Maybe I'm the idiot. Or maybe they're going to lose money. It's not for me to judge anymore, right? It's just stay focused. I know something really, really in depth, and that's the thing I'm focused on. And, you know, look, it's like, it's kind of this weird feeling of like, I don't want folks to be assholes, but like every once in a while, you know, I understand why somebody's an asshole to somebody on the internet. And I'm glad some of the assholes are on our side. Right? Because like, you know, those are our assholes, right? Like, like I get it, right? But at the same time, that's just not me. That's not how I choose to engage. And you know, it works for me. Maybe it doesn't work for somebody else, my approach, and that's okay too.
Does it bug you? I mean, I know you're not going to like go out and make it your mission to go comment and be an asshole about it, but like when I see a kind of characterization from, because we're starting to see it now with like YouTube influencers and stuff, that there's a very strong anti-NFT sentiment coming out of the gaming industry and like the furry community and just mainstream in general. And they're lumping Bitcoin in with like what's going on with NFT and like scam, like literal scam coins where it's like a charity coin, save the kids token or whatever. And you got all these YouTubers now starting to comment on it. And to me, it kind of feels like, oh man, I wish it was separate. I wish we really had clarification that Bitcoin is over here accomplishing this mission and crypto and NFTs, sure, it's going to exist, but it's not Bitcoin. It's something completely different. But the state of the market we're in right now and the state of the education in the space is that like, unfortunately, most participants that came in 2021 just think like, this is the new stuff. And I also want some Bitcoin. I'm going to have some Bitcoin, but it's Bitcoin and crypto. So does that ever frustrate you, or you're just hustling so hard you don't even have time to pay attention to that?
It's just, what can I control? Right. And ultimately, I just don't spend a lot of time on other stuff now. And this sounds crazy, right? But like 3 years ago, I was all over all this shit, right? And it was like, I cared about what every single person thought. And this, and like at this point, it's just like, who cares, right? Again, focus on what you can control and don't worry about everything else. And like, it'll work itself out. The best judge, jury, and executioner in financial markets is long-term performance. Trust me, there's a lot of people right now that are like, damn, I don't know if NFTs are going to be a real thing because I bought this thing and it's down 80%. There's also a lot of people who are like, NFTs are the greatest thing in the world. I bought one and I flipped it 3 days later and I bought a house.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Right. And everything in between those two extremes. But ultimately, over a long period of time, like what's funny to me, I think about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all these financial assets, is you can basically take all the timeless investing principles that value investors, the Warren Buffett disciples, etc. Like they read it like it's like literally their Bible, right? They take all that and just superimpose it on this new industry. And I'm going to paraphrase the exact saying here, but let me see if I can look it up real quick. So the whole idea is, let's see. In the short run, the market's a voting machine, but in the long run, the market's a weighing machine. Well, guess what?
Right.
That's true in crypto as well. Guess what else is true? The best holding time of a great asset is forever, right? You know, you should still spend less money than you make, right? Like all these things that we've known literally for centuries, they still apply today. And what we're watching is like a whole new generation of people get a crash course in finance. You can run in front of the train and you can yell and scream and tell them to stop. But if they can't hit the brakes in time, you just get run over. It's like, get the hell off the tracks, right? And I think that is, once you kind of understand that, it's like, okay, let's see what happens.
What about like the young people that now, like the Gen Zs and stuff that are getting excited by DAOs and DeFi and NFTs and stuff like that? They're coming in, they're looking at the space and they're getting so excited they want to go work in this area. Do you have any like strategic thoughts around that? Like, how do we get more Gen Zs to like pay attention and start building on Bitcoin?
I think that ultimately, the more people that join the crypto industry, the better for Bitcoin. And this may be, again, counterintuitive. Do you think more or less people hold Bitcoin today because of NFTs? You would think initially, like,
I think it's
probably
more,
less.
yeah.
I think it's more, right?
Yeah.
Because there's more people who have digital wallets. There's more people who have a Coinbase account or an OpenSea account or whatever, right? And so naturally, some of that interest flows into Bitcoin as well. There is very much, in my opinion,
but I don't know if it's a good effective marketing strategy. Because at the end of the day, if the bubble blows up, they're going to be like, why did you let me think an NFT JPEG was worth more than a Bitcoin or whatever? So
I don't
agree
necessarily think that that's the Bitcoin marketing strategy, right? I don't think that that's a good one. But I always tell people, like, what are the use cases for Bitcoin? And one of them that no one ever talks about is speculation. But like Bitcoin's marketing department is the price. When Bitcoin goes up in price, everyone starts talking about it. The mainstream media starts covering it. People are like, oh man, damn, I should have bought it when it was 9,000. Now it's at 50,000. I should go buy some now, right? That's just how human nature works. It works in all asset classes. It's not a Bitcoin thing. That's true in stocks. It's true in real estate, everything. Well, when that occurs, then what happens? Then some of those people, as Bitcoin's price crashes, as it always does, because it's volatile in US dollar price, some of them leave, but a lot of them stay. So it's like, look, the market's a referee. Who the hell knows what I know versus anybody else? I think so far Bitcoin's doing a great job. It's been 12 years. Bitcoin has $1 trillion market cap. There's literally millions of people around the world that are mining, that are running nodes, that are building on Bitcoin, etc. And I think that it's just a start. And so when I zoom all the way out and I say, all right, where are we going? I think that Bitcoin is still on track to become a global store of value that's programmatic, that is fully transparent, it's digital and decentralized. And I think the longer time goes on, the more and more people that realize, hey, you know, maybe I should get some of this in case it catches on, in the words of Satoshi.
Well, look, I appreciate the hour and a half. I think it was. We had some technical difficulties at the beginning, but great chat, man. You know, I used to listen to your podcast a lot when I don't know, 2016, 17, I can't remember when. You used to always ask people at the end about the aliens question. I haven't listened to the show much lately. I've been so busy. Like Clubhouse has taken up all my time. I'm hanging out with like American Hoddle and Jason Williams and people like that on Clubhouse all the time. But do you talk about that much? What did you think of the Eric Weinstein UFO thing that happened in 2021? Like he was legitimately holding Clubhouse rooms with thousands of people talking about aliens. Like, what did you think of that? You got any thoughts on it?
I just don't think that it's possible aliens don't exist. I think the bigger question is, will we come in contact with them or discover them or them discover us in our lifetimes? They may just be so far away that there's no way, right? But I don't know. We'll see. I tend to think we probably don't know all the information that somebody somewhere on Earth knows. There's somebody with more information than me. You know, did aliens come to Earth or what? Who knows? But just if you're looking at probabilities, it's pretty high that aliens exist.
You think if they came here and they had like this even more scarce quantum light speed coin thing that like travels across the multiverse, you think we'd call it a shit coin?
I think that if aliens show up, what money they use is going to be the last of our concern. Right? It's kind of like the people who are like, well, what happens if the power goes out? I'll be like, great. You won't be able to use Bitcoin or dollars, and you're not going to care because you're going to want a gun. Right? Like, come on, right? It's crazy.
Well, I'll hold a 1% slice of alien coin. That's it.
You shitcoining pre-miner.
You quantum shitcoiner. Shitcoin in the multiverse.
All right, I gotta go.
Thanks.
I appreciate you doing this. This was awesome. We should do it again at some point.
Yeah, come on and hang out with us on Clubhouse a little bit every once in a while.
Man, I had to. Oh, I can't believe I'm gonna admit this. I had to delete Clubhouse. There's just so many notifications. I kept getting sucked in. I had to make a stand. I had to get my time back. So I ended up.
It's probably more efficient that you did that.
Yeah, maybe
that
I'll
room
jump
that you
on
did
it.
with Kevin O'Leary that night. That was such a good room. That was such a great time hanging out, talking about his watches and stuff. That was pretty fun.
He's got plenty of them.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Thank you.